Let us pray. Holy God, we know that you're always speaking through the strangers and the friends, through the sunrise and the sunset, through the random acts of kindness and the feelings that stir hope to awaken in us. We know that you speak through dreams and prayer, through a still, small voice and bursts of overwhelming joy. We know that you are always speaking, but we also know that we're inclined to miss it. Settle our spirits now to hear your word fully. We want to be part of the conversation. Gratefully we pray. Amen.
The first reading is from Luke, chapter 9, starting at verse 28. About a week after he had said these things, Jesus took Peter, John and James with him and went up a hill to pray. While he was praying, his face changed its appearance and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly 2 men were there talking with him. They were Moses and Elijah, who appeared in heavenly glory and talked with Jesus about the way in which he would soon fulfill God's purpose by dying in Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were sound asleep, but they woke up and saw Jesus' glory and the 2 men who were standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, how good it is that we are here. We will make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not really know what he was saying. While he was still speaking, a cloud appeared and covered them with its shadow, and the disciples were afraid as the cloud came over them. A voice said from the cloud, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice stopped, there was Jesus all alone. The disciples kept quiet about all this and told no one at that time anything they had seen. The next day, Jesus and the 3 disciples went down from the hill, and a large crowd met Jesus. A man shouted from the crowd, "Teacher, I beg you, look at my son, my only son." A spirit attacks him with a sudden shout and throws him into a fit, so that he foams at the mouth. It keeps on hurting him and will hardly let him go. I begged your disciples to drive it out, but they couldn't. Jesus answered, "How unbelieving and wrong you people are. How long must I stay with you? How long do I have to put up with you?" Then he said to the man, "Bring your son here." As the boy was coming, the demon knocked him to the ground and threw him into a fit. Jesus gave a command to the evil spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. All the people were amazed at the mighty power of God. And the second reading is the Muse by Norton. Every now and then, you need to hear another voice from one who sees through all the facade, who can cut steel with a knife and evoke hope in the most desolate desert. She sits down softly beside you and whispers of disappointed dreams and adventures that did not have the courage to leave home. It's not so much what she says that penetrates your toughened glass exterior. It's what is not said, the question and the pause that awaits. A light exposing hidden recesses, terrifying, comforting, guiding. And then, just as you think you can second guess her next question, she's gone. Her work is done. You and only you can walk this road less travelled.
Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Choosing that image this week was prior to Russia invading Ukraine. Besides it saying swords to plowshares, you can see that in the painting. possibly. God's view on the world, so Isaiah says, turning swords to plowshares. Why? Why do we keep throwing stones at one another to resolve our conflicts when there's another way? I wonder what that painting says to you. I wonder what the vision of God's earth becoming a different reality means to their building peace in our time. It was a bit more than where I was going to start. In following Marshall Armstrong, unlike Marshall Armstrong, I've done a few crazy things in my life, and maybe I somewhat rise above the rest. One of them was becoming a minister, and the other is joining the Navy. Both intimidating, both of them made me throw up on more than one occasion. But there's also another similarity, and like many other things I do, they bring entirely new perspective on life and living. No, we didn't coerce the reading of that story and what we're saying this morning. From the time we were toddlers, and you remember when you were toddlers, more or less, and we look for those high places to be able to see, don't we? We want to get up on that high chair so that we can be at the table with everybody else and see everybody else. Or we beg to be placed on top of somebody's shoulders so that we can see Santa in the parade or the other thing that's happening in the distance, and we get a skyscraper view. Or we scamper up trees when we're a bit more than a toddler maybe, and we love to spy down on top of others. We look over the neighbour's fence and go, "Hey Mum, they've got a swimming pool." Or, "Hey Mum, she's not wearing any drawers." Childhood, no, it wasn't one of my memories. Childhood has that era of pure spontaneity, doesn't it? We laugh until the milk in our mouth comes out of our noses. And our parents look at us in disgust. And if we love somebody with no simple peck on the cheek, we come tearing out of the house with our open arms yelling, "Yeah, you're home." We loved before we feared. We were curious before we were threatened. We accepted before we judged, unless it was leeks and white sauce. But I like leeks and white sauce now. Phyllis Diller, actress and comedian, said, "We spend the first 12 months of our children's lives teaching them to walk and talk, and then the next 12 years telling them to sit down and shut up." We talked about that on the way in, didn't we, really, about shutting up? And here we are as adults, clinging to our stale, rote, safe places. Don't take that personally. We prefer schedules to interruptions. We prefer plastic to the real thing. Obvious reasons. We prefer schedules to interruptions and predictability to spontaneity. Spontaneity is risky, but then so is real life. But we live in a world where we can't predict what will happen next. Life has no script. As Albert Einstein said, if we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be called research. The story of Moses and Jesus, the stories of their hazardous journeys, each to a mountain, was scripted well after the events. Was it their intention to go to a mountaintop, seeking the divine and new revelation? Seeking the divine for a new revelation? Or was it opportune to get away from the crowds described as, and the version that Cathy read was a little watered down. The version I read described the crowds in Moses' case as being obstinate, and in Jesus' case, perverse. I wonder why people go to the mountain. Well, for the last 10 days, Kim and I have been away. We left the routine of home and the importance of work and ascended to another place. Climbing the mountain took about 5 days. 5 days of winding down, letting go, and constantly reminding myself that indispensable people all end up in the cemetery sometime or other. I walked and talked, and I talked myself out of thinking about the highs and lows of work, the conflicted and afflicted, and finally I reached the top. I reached the top, and I have a day where the book I read, the view I take in, the air I breathe, all added up to a relaxed state of body, mind and soul. And I worshipped the moment. I must be honest though, there wasn't a lot of walking or traversing up rough mountain tracks. We were no more than 10 metres from the high water mark. And we looked from our caravan east. The sun rose on the southern side of which island am I looking at? Which sunrise? Come on, you sailors. Great Barrier. Great Barrier Island. Yeah, that was sunrise. I didn't get up for every sunrise. I was up for every sunset. So we looked between Kawa Island and Motekete Island. And each sunrise was spectacular and different from the other before, so I'm told. Or I was more relaxed and at home in myself. That made each sunrise look a little bit more spectacular. Who knows? I didn't get out of bed to overthink it. But I was able to sit in awe and wonder and take in the mountaintop experience at sea level, which is one of those thin places the Celts talk about. It wasn't the only coming out experience to experience the moment. Kim and I were able to look over there and look at Aotea and look at Hidakimata, Mount Hobson, and say, remember the day we walked up there? Anybody else walked up Mount Hobson? Yeah. Must be a sailor thing to do. And I was reminded of that prayer that goes, Kia hara te marino, ke whakapapa pou nā mu te moana, ke tere karo he rohe e mua tau hu rai, ua rai. May the calm be spread around you. May the sea glisten like greenstone and the shimmer of summer dance across your path. Long before I started to write this sermon, that was the thought as I saw the sea from that perspective, Martins Bay. Like all mountaintop experiences, there's the coming down. The coming down is okay, it's the arrival. It's the arrival that has its moments. And on his first arrival, Moses threw the tablets down in disgust for what he saw, and he shattered them into many pieces, and there's a legend about those shattered pieces. And then Jesus, in his story, is less than charitable on his coming down. He was less than charitable on his coming down. And as I say, the version Cathy read was a little watered down. The other version I read, it says when he came down, he saw what he saw in terms of them not being able to heal the young one. Jesus says, you faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and bear with you? Wow. Just think if I was to use that with the rest of you. You'd probably run me out of Birkenhead, Northcote. But then I would be in good company, wouldn't I? Because Jesus got run out of town a few times too. But I wouldn't use that of you. Encountering God may be ecstatic, but it also drives us back into the world. Moments of wonder eventuate into moments of service. We experience ecstasy, and then we mop the floor. I guess our Labour Party, our government's Labour Party, has well and truly come down off the mountain. Following a decisive win in an election after harrowing 3 years of calamities hitting our people of Aotearoa, well, I believe the government did a good job. The first party under MMP to win outright in their second election, Labour went into an even more torrid affair of a worldwide pandemic, having to make an unenviable decisions, which were bipartisan choices on the whole, to keep New Zealand as safe as possible. They must be commended. Having lost the fight to stamp out and controlling, now eventual living with and opening to presumably unpredictable path. This is not ceding defeat, but making the best from a continually evolving situation And I think most of us get that. As a Zen Buddhist would note, before enlightenment I chopped wood and carried water. After enlightenment, I chopped wood and carried water. That might encourage Jacinda and the team. The same applies to divine enlightenment. We may end up doing the same personal and professional activities, but now we do them with an awareness that each place can be a thin place, and each moment a conversation with a conversationless God. I wonder what internal conversations the government are having in this time of the valley of the shadow of death. Particularly when accused of being undemocratic, charged with taking New Zealand away from its hard-forced democracy. I would imagine it's a pretty tough accusation to bear, to contend with. And how do you respond to that? How to carry on? What touchstones for Jacinda and the team that they would use to continue the course? Keep their nerve, let alone keep their sanity. One day we may look back at this mountaintop experience which sees us in the valley of the shadow of death. And we may look at that valley, as we often do, and learn that those were the times we learned to trust, to have faith. To have faith in who we are and what we do, and like many things, really appreciate it later. The rationale to the accusation, we are no longer democratic or on a slippery slope, at least, I find very unsatisfying to put myself on the line. I don't necessarily find it a pleasant place, but I'm regularly in conversation with both camps of vaccinated and unvaccinated. Conversations with people who would go but don't quite commit to getting to the occupation in Wellington, even though I opened the door for them to go. Their uncharitable marks are not unlike those of Jesus. You faithless and perverse generation, is the finger point. But I think it lacks the integrity of the comment that Jesus makes. In the other ear, from the opposing camp, they also postulate, that's the word. They also postulate from a distance with uncharitable remarks, not unlike those of Jesus. You faithless and perverse generation, but I think they also lack the integrity of Jesus' comments. And as William Blake, which we quoted, if only the doors of perception were cleansed, we would see the infinity of all things. The accusation of being undemocratic has got me thinking, and I don't buy into it, the slippery path from democracy. And long before COVID, and you may have heard me say on many times, long before those polarising views that we seem to have as New Zealanders that are getting big attention, I've been questioning our democracy in terms of equality for all and asking, what does democracy look like? Not that we aren't in it. What does it look like? And if I have a message to the opposing camps, to my friends in the opposing camps, because they are friends in the opposing camps, it will comprise of two words: chutzpah and humility. I don't know if you've heard the word chutzpah. I think that's the right way of saying it. It's an old Hebrew, Aramaic word that has been chiseled with time. By chutzpah, I mean knowing that I have a voice that needs to be heard and the right to speak it. Audacity might be another word to use, but chutzpah sticks on my tongue. We have a voice, and it needs to be heard, and we have a right to speak it. By humility, I mean accepting that my truth is always partial and not be true at all. I may not be true at all. So I need to listen with openness and respect, especially to the other, as much as I need to speak my own voice with clarity and conviction. Humility plus chutzpah equals the kind of citizens a democracy needs. Of course, it takes more than two words to name the qualities we need to sustain a better democracy. Still, they will guide us in being a civil society, starting with being civil to one another, which is a long way to sustaining a democracy we can be proud of. We saw a little uncivil act conversation yesterday in Presbytery, didn't we? It disappointed us. It did. There wasn't a lot of chutzpah and humility necessarily. Parker Palmer, Courage and Renewal, the Circles of Trust, which many of you know, and we've used the Circles of Trust and what we gleaned through discernment from that process to generate this community of Oniwa Christian community, the community, Oniwa Christian community. He adds to that chutzpah and humility, and he gives a handful of ideas. I'm not going to go into depth of them, just give the ideas. We must understand that we are all in this together. Idea one. We're all in it together. Not just some, not just a few, not just intellectuals, not just the scientists, not just those who don't understand, but all of us together. And we must develop, because it doesn't come easily, the appreciation of the other. And we must cultivate the ability to hold the tensions together in life-giving ways. And we must generate a sense of personal voice and agency. It's not always easy to say in affirming, encouraging words how I feel and why I feel. But the one that sticks with me, and it sticks with Oniwa Christian community, is that we must strengthen our capacity to create community. It's nearly impossible to achieve voice without community. It's nearly impossible to achieve voice without a community. It takes a village to raise a whina kupa. And without a community, it's almost impossible to exercise the power of the one in a manner that multiplies. COVID is spreading because the community is together. If we were individually at home, it may not spread. The power of the community. It takes the village of Aotearoa to translate Dame Whina's act of personal integrity into social change. And Greg will happily explain to you, I'm sure, that community really comes ready-made. We have to work at it. But, and there's always a but, the caveat about creating a community in places where we live, work, express our faith, does not mean we abandon other parts of our lives to become full-time organisers. Chutzpah and humility and community come by a steady companionship of 2 or 3 kindred spirits. The courage we need to speak and act as citizens in our ever-evolving democracy. That in itself is an attractive community people will long for and want to be part or belong to. Marshall Armstrong did a great job. He was changing the perception. He built a little community. 2 or 3 kindred spirits together. Build a community that others, I'm sure, would want to belong to. Chutzpah and humility are as much about turning our swords into ploughshares as this and this, as we're the adventure together.